Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty Podcast. Coming at you live on the Fantasy Holics Podcast Network, presented by the Fantasy Holics. I'm Bo. That's Brant. Brant, I'm excited to be back. Last week we came at you with the hot takes. Not as hot as last year, I will venture to say. But nonetheless, we got the hot takes out. And it's weird. You know, I know the summer's progressing. You know, you get through the 4th of July. And for me and my household, it's like 4th of July happens. Then my girl's birthday party is like the next weekend. And it's like super busy for a while. And then it's like I blink and it's back to school. And I was looking at something the other day and it's like, man, back to school is almost here, Brent. You know what back to school means? Football season is upon us.
It means normally we already have our first game because I believe that's August 1st in the Hall of Fame game, and then it's full bore back to football.
22 days from today, my friend, we will have an NFL preseason game with the Houston Texans and the Chicago Bears in the Hall of Fame game. That is August 1st. So yeah, that's coming up, Brant. So we're in the full swing of things in startup drafts and redrafts and every kind of draft you can think of, best ball drafts that are going. It's only right that we come out and hit the people with some busts. I'm sure we're going to come out with a My Guys episode before the season officially kicks off. But this week, Brant, we're coming at you with some busts.
Absolutely. This is where the Fatboyz, as you see, we're busting at the seams. We're going to talk about some of our busts that we just don't see how they're going to live up to ADP. We're not going to say these guys may not be good draft choices later in the draft if they do happen to slide. But at the current ADP, I took it in half-point PPR. It's kind of hard to see where they're at and how they're going to live up to that. We'll talk about that here shortly. I want to talk about that Hall of Fame game. There's rumors that's been swirling that there's a chance we may actually see Caleb Williams play a series or two in that Hall of Fame game. So there is a chance there actually might be something worth watching in that Hall of Fame game, not just a couple of guys just waiting to make an NFL roster. But we're 22 days away from that. Training camp should be getting up to full swing. I think it's it's next week, I think, is when we're starting to really get into the full swing.
Yeah, and at the very least, Brant, it's football. Even if there's no big names playing in the Hall of Fame game, it's football. And, you know, for a lot of us, that's that's enough to get us excited. The fact that you're going to have two pro teams. Listen, we've tuned in the past and watched some Thursday night games that had less talent than will be on the sheet display on that Hall of Fame game. If you think back, just what was it, a year or two ago when the Patriots played a Thursday night game and they had to use the graphic of Bill Belichick to represent their team because they had no players of note. So, you know, it's not that bad for us to just be able to watch some football. You know, and I want to get back to the busting at the seams thing too, because, you know, that could have different meanings for some folks, Brant. Like, you know, you're working out at the gym so much that your biceps are getting so big, they're rupturing the seams of your shirt, you know, or, you know, what have you, or, you know, you're busting across the seam of the finish line at a long distance race that you've been a part of. No, my friend, this is more like when you squat down to pick up a pin that you dropped and you blow your pants out and you got to walk around like hiding yourself because you don't want people to see that you just split your britches. That's the kind of bust we're talking about in today's episode.
Or maybe you bust a button and you're not sure if it landed on the roof or hit the man on the moon. But
just like Adam Sandler said, they shouldn't have been standing there.
That's right. But let's get into these busts. Let's get our bibs on.
Let's eat. All right, Brant. Busts is one of those episodes that's going to be controversial. Somewhere out there, somebody is not going to agree with our takes. And you know what? 6 months from now, we may be right back here saying, "Yeah, I put my foot in my mouth, whatever." But here we are anyway. We're going to put our thoughts and opinions out there on some guys today. And if you're sitting at home going, "Man, I can't handle the hate on this player," like similarly to the way that you guys hated on me last year for my DJ Moore take, I live off that stuff. Brant lives off that stuff. Let us know. If you don't like a take we have, we'd be happy to sit and debate you with it all day long. I'm sure both Brant and myself would run out of wind much before we ran out of ideas to defend some of these busts. So, without further ado, Brant, let's jump into this. I'm ready to talk about some busts.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some of these guys, like I said, some of these guys we think are just going to bust and not have any relevancy or possibly get replaced. And some of these guys we're just talking about not being able to live up to their ADP. But absolutely, come back at us. We'll talk about it. Before we jump right into this, I wanted to put out, make sure you guys are tuning into the Fantasy Holics Facebook page as we're putting in some team previews are coming out now. And to get ready for the season, in those previews, make sure you click it, check out the website, check out some of these guys are working hard behind the scenes typing these up. Make sure you guys give them a good like and a good read and talk to them about it. But yeah, let's get into these busts. You want me to go first?
Take us away, Brant.
I'm going to go with one of the guys that it's funny. I'm going to talk about it. This is the first year that I've drafted him, and I think it might be the first year I've owned him in his NFL career, and that is Davante Adams. I got him real late in a dynasty startup. I needed something that I thought I was comfortable with, and then I started digging a little deeper because, his name's Davante Adams. You should be extremely comfortable with plugging him into your wide receiver one spot. So he's going as a top 12 wide receiver off the board in fantasy and half-point PPRs. He's got Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell at the helm this year. I know I love Minshew. I talk about it all the time. I love the Jorts. I love the stash. Minshew's not a risk taker, though. He's going to put the ball in good spots. He's not going to throw the ball up, 50-50 balls. He's not going to throw that deep ball. So that's a lot that Adams is good at. Adams did finish as a wide receiver 10 last year, playing all 17 games. He had 1,144 yards and 8 touchdowns. But let's talk about, we've added Gardner Minshew. That's probably going to be the QB1. You added Brock Bowers, who's going to slide out and demand some targets and a lot of love from the wide receiver position. This guy is a beast. If you've never seen Brock Bowers in college, go out and watch the film. This is a guy, he's going to turn heads from the start of the season. And now we go to the Minshew, another hate on him. He's only supported a top 15 wide receiver once in his career, and that was number 15, and that was Michael Pittman last season there in Indy. And if you think, Michael Pittman had some bust or breakout games at the beginning of the year with Anthony Richardson before Anthony Richardson went away. So that was also supported by another quarterback. So, like I said, he likes to spread the ball around and play it very safe rather than throw that deep ball. Also, you got Jacoby Myers there, who also had 10 total touchdowns last year. So he had 2 more than Davante Adams did, and it could be a better value. He's going outside of the top 24 wide receivers is Jacoby Myers. He played in 16 games last year and he finished as a wide receiver 24. So this guy could be a value pick. And I just don't see how Gardner Minshew is going to support 2 good wide receivers and Brock Bowers. I don't see enough love. You're talking about Zamir White coming out of the backfield and the safety that Gardner Minshew plays with. I just don't see how Davante Adams can live up to a wide receiver 1 stat as he did last year. It was rough to get there. It was a rough year for him. His targets were down by a little bit. I just don't feel that Davante Adams is going to live up to that top 12 wide receiver. Now, if you can get him later, I think he's going as like the 18th player off the board too. So it's real tough to be living up to that.
Yeah, and Brant, I think too, when you talk about it, obviously we've said it on this show a few times, and Father Time is undefeated, right? Eventually, that downhill swing starts, and it's impossible to revert from it. But if you look at those other players that are coming off the board, in and around him, I imagine there's several players with more upside. As far as better quarterback play, better coaching potential, better overall offenses. So they're going to have more meaningful targets. Now, I think Devontae could be a top 12 wide receiver again this year. I think the world exists, but the touchdown equity is going to have to be there. They're going to have to air the ball out an awful lot more than I expect them to. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Brant, but I believe in his introductory press conference, which he got rid of the interim and took over as the official head coach, I do believe Antonio Pierce said he wanted to establish the run in Vegas and he wanted to be a physical football team. So I think those things, do take away from Devontae Adams and kind of his allure of the past.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they want to do. They want to establish the run because they got to keep the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hand, Justin Herbert's hand. Whoever the quarterback in Denver, I guess they don't really have to keep the ball out of his hands, but they play a lot of games where they got to try to milk the clock and keep the ball away, so they don't want to score in bunches or as fast as possible. Drake London is a name that's right there at the number 17, while Adams is number 18. Then you have Chris Olave at 20. You have A-Chain at 22. You got Sam Laporta at 24. One of the names that maybe you could question is the one right next to him, and that's Josh Allen in a single QB league. Maybe you're not reaching to 19 for him, but still, Devontae Adams is going as the 18th player overall off the board. It's just all those names around him I would feel more comfortable with taking.
Yeah, I think at this point in his career, and unless something crazy happens in between now and the start of the season, and Tom Brady unretires and is under center for the Raiders or something, I don't know as though I'm comfortable taking him over any of the names you added, with the exception of maybe Josh Allen. So I'm fine with that. You talked about bunches of speed, Brant, and that's where I'm going to start here. And I'm going to be a little bit. I'm going to take a little bit of aggression out on this rookie player here. Xavier Worthy, who's never played a snap in the National Football League, Brant, is being drafted as the 37th wide receiver off the board. Now, I know 37th, it's like, how are you going to call a player at the 37th position a bust? Do you know who wide receiver 37 was last year, Brant? Drake London. Drake London was the wide receiver 37 last year. So for Xavier Worthy to live up to where he's being drafted, to get to wide receiver 37, he would have to do one of two things. He would either have to have similar stats to 59 receptions, 674 yards, receiving 8 touchdowns, which was at the 38 last year, or 62 receptions, 905 yards, 2 touchdowns, which is Drake London's. Now, here's my problem with that, Brant. I think those numbers are attainable, especially when you talk about Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. Here's the problem. I genuinely, in my heart, believe, Brant, Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, and Isaiah Pacheco will all have way more touches of the football than Xavier Worthy. I think Xavier Worthy probably comes out and has, I'm not saying catches, I'm saying touches for Pacheco, because I think he's going to be a higher option. I think you're looking at around 75 targets, 50 receptions, somewhere in that neighborhood, if I'm being generous with Xavier Worthy. Now, here's the other problem, Brant. I left out a name, and I know you're probably wanting to say this one. Marquise Hollywood Brown is also a new addition to this team, is also going to be looking to establish trust with Patrick Mahomes in a very similar fashion. Whichever one of them does that, you're talking about one of these guys is not going to be on the field very much. Now, unless, and I could be way off, Brant, I know you kind of similarly agree with me on this, I don't expect a suspension for Rashee Rice this season. I think that may come next year if one happens. So again, without a suspension or off-field issues, taking one of these players off or an injury, it wouldn't shock me at all in traditional 11 personnel if you see some form of Hollywood Brown, Kelce, Rice, and Pacheco as the skill position players. I wouldn't even be shocked to see Noah Gray get more field time this year than Xavier Worthy. And again, in a dynasty landscape, I have no problem with Xavier Worthy being the 37th wide receiver off the board. This was pulled from current redraft ADPs right now on Sleeper. That is incredible to me that Xavier Worthy is going at 37, 4 spots behind Rashee Rice, who, again, I know the general public's a little nervous about Rashee Rice, Brant, but my goodness, Xavier Worthy, who I think is one of the most gimmicky players to ever play in the National Football League, would have to have an incredible season with a lot of other things to go right for him to get to his ceiling that he's being drafted at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about a gimmicky wide receiver. What was that? John Ross did it a few years ago. Never stayed on the field. DK Metcalf did do it a few years ago, being the fastest wide receiver in the combine, and he was able to. And then Tyreek Hill. But the skill level between DK, Tyreek, and Xavier Worthy is astronomical. So this is a gimmicky guy. You already have your speedy wide receiver. I think you may see it take a year or two for Worthy to really develop the trust and show more playing time on the field. I think he starts behind Hollywood Brown, the veteran presence. And really, Xavier Worthy did not impress me much with his ability to track the ball as well and hold on to the ball that well in college. And it may not be a whole lot for him to lose trust in Patrick Mahomes with how many drops they had last year.
I agree.
All right, well, here we go. This is going to be the first shot that a lot of people are going to hate. I am going with Mr. C.J. Stroud as a bust this year. He is being drafted as a top 5 quarterback in half-point single QB leagues. He has no real rushing upside. He had 39 total rushing attempts last year. Most were coming off of scrambles, which they have beefed up that offensive line. I think he had 3 rushing touchdowns. That was because they were one of the worst rushing offenses in the NFL inside the red zone. Well, what they do, they went out and they added a veteran running backs in Joe Mixon, who will be helping with that and stealing those red zone touches and rushing it in. I understand 3 touchdowns doesn't seem like much. 3 touchdowns and he finishes QB 11, but we're drafting him inside the top 5 quarterbacks already. I understand this guy was phenomenal, fun to watch, made his wide receivers look great. He had 23 touchdowns. He only attempted passing the ball 499 times. Really not a whole lot of attempts. This is a team that is very capable of hanging some points, but I think you're going to see a lot more rushing, and you're drafting him at what your hopes is the ceiling as a top 5 quarterback now. I just don't see it. I expect him to spread the ball out well. I do expect him to be a top 12 quarterback again, and you're probably talking 7 to 10 area. He'll be serviceable, but you cannot be drafting him inside the top 5 draft picks. You're drafting him with people like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson. I'm missing the running back of all running backs. And I mean, how are you drafting him around names like that when he only finishes at the QB 11? Do you expect some resurgence in his rushing and it going way up? No, I expect it to go down. I would be surprised if he beats 25 rushing attempts this year, because they beefed up the line too to help him be able to pass the ball. And without that Konami code, why are we drafting him so high?
Yeah, I mean, again, he's got all the weapons in the world. I mean, the addition of Diggs, Tank Dell healthy, hopefully Nico Collins is an emergence. But you're absolutely right, Brent. There's a way that all 3 of those wide receivers are pretty relevant without CJ Stroud being a top 10 asset at quarterback. And hey, the sophomore slump's real. That's a thing we've seen with a lot of players. CJ Stroud definitely may be the guy to come over, overtake that and not be affected by it. How much are you willing to bet on it? Again, if you take CJ Stroud as your quarterback that early and he does bust, you're done in a redraft league, Brant. It's over with, because you're missing out on all the value around those top 3 rounds where you're taking that quarterback. And then if you pass, let's say you pull CJ Stroud in front of one of those other names you mentioned, the Mahomeses or the Allens or the Herberts or whatever, and Stroud doesn't hit, not only are you losing that value, but somebody else has that other player. So it's a double-edged sword. Now, again, Stroud to me, Brant, is one of those players. He could be the next big thing at quarterback. It definitely could be a thing, right? I mean, like I said, the weapons are there. The offensive coordinator is back again, and Bobby Slowick, who was a hot head coaching candidate this year. But again, it's hard to bet against a sophomore slump. We've seen it so many times in the National Football League. Wouldn't surprise me if we see it again. All right. I'm going to come at you with mine that I think is going to get the most resistance potentially. It's not the one that I'm the most passionate about, but I think it's the one that I could see the most resistance on. And that's Kyron Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. Brant, this situation reminds me of a few years back when Dameon Pierce really kind of took ownership of that Texans backfield. And the hype was after that first year, the hype train was, just unreal with him. He skyrocketed up ADPs, and then he kind of had a bad year. And then last year he lost his job to Devin Singletary, which you and I said was going to happen at some point last season. We were on record of saying so. He left, and now they replaced Devin Singletary with Joe Mixon. So again, a much better fit for that team than Dameon Pierce. So anyway, back to Kyron Williams, Brant. What did they do? They went and used one of the earlier picks in their draft on Blake Corum, who, again, I don't think any of us truly know what this running back class is going to shake down as. I know there's a lot of, I've seen different top threes. I've seen different top fives. But one thing we do know is Blake Corum is going to take some work away from Kyron Williams. Okay. Here's the thing, Brant. Kyron Williams is being drafted as the 7th running back overall. Do you know where he finished last year?
I just looked it up, so I won't spoil it for you.
He finished at 7th last year, Brant. 15 total touchdowns, 1,350 total yards, and 32 receptions. I don't see that as repeatable for Kyron Williams. One, you're going to have a healthy Cooper Kupp. You've got the emergence of Puka Nacua now. And now you've got Blake Corum to add to this offense, who's going to spell Kyron Williams some, I would assume. So even if you talk him down to 10 touchdowns, which is still a pretty good season, Brant, and you keep the receptions pretty similar, you could not change anything except for take away 5 touchdowns from him, which again I think is fair to say that I think Blake Corum's going to get some work. If you take 5 touchdowns away from Kyron Williams, Brant, he falls outside of the top 10 last year. So it's really interesting to me that he's going as high as he is. When there's, again, the other names around him to me are just as interesting. And maybe I'm just a Rams hater. I don't really believe in the Puka Nacua hype train. I'd be an idiot to say there's not some relevance to it, but I just don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to draft Puka Nacua. And I don't really want to draft Kyron Williams either, Brant, because I just don't see this as repeatable for him. I think if you bottled what he did last year, that's what he's going to chase the rest of his career, those numbers. And I just don't know if he ever gets them again. Not to say he's not going to be fantasy relevant, not to say he's not going to be, the touch leader out of that backfield in LA. I think it'd be outlandish to expect Blake Corum to come in and demand that kind of volume year one. But I don't think it's repeatable. There was just no other running backs on that roster last year that were a challenge to Kyron Williams. And so for those reasons, Brant, I think Kyron Williams bust this year, and I want no part of it.
I could see it as being a bust here. Drafting him right where he finished. He did only play in 12 games. He did miss 4 games. So that's a big thing. But they went out, like you said, they added a running back. He had 260 carries in the 12 games. Like, that is a lot of work for a running back. I get it. It doesn't sound that bad. But like I said, he missed 4 total games. So he missed, 200, almost 4 games. You're talking 100 touches to, another. So you're talking it's going to take him 360 carries. He was very efficient last year. Teams will be ready for it. You got Cooper Kupp back. You added Blake Corum. I just don't see where he finishes as the same as he was this year.
Mm-hmm.
You're drafting him in a bell cow situation when he's probably in a running back by committee.
Yep. All right, Brent, take us away with your last one.
My last one. This one I'm very passionate about. It's inside the same division of the NFC West. That is Brandon Ayuk. He is going as a wide receiver 13 in fantasy in an offense that he's not even fully committed to. We don't even know if he's going to be a Niner. We don't even know if he wants to be a Niner. We've had trade talks. We've had contract issues. We've had his drafting of the replacement where they added Ricky Parcell in the draft this year, a guy with the same skill set where he's a fast guy, can move the ball down the field, gets it in the short routes, and makes people miss. He's not even the featured wide receiver in this or he's not even the featured player in this offense as you have CMC. We know Brock Purdy's not going to take chances. He's going to spread the ball out. He's going to make sure that the ball moves. Brock Purdy is a guy that's a safe player. So why are we drafting a guy that's never finished as a wide receiver 1? His best finish is a wide receiver 14. He has 2 wide receiver finishes outside the top 30, but yet we're drafting him higher than he's ever finished. And he's probably got more question marks surrounding him than he ever has. Now, if he gets traded, I could be talking a whole different story. I could be talking a whole bunch. But right now, we're taking him as the wide receiver 13 in a situation that is completely – we're not even sure if he's going to start the season on the field. We're not even sure if he's going to start the season as a Niner. He could hold out. I just don't understand why we're taking a guy to be our wide receiver 1 when – CMC, Deebo Samuels, Ricky Purcell, George Kittle, so much in that offense. And they're all being drafted right around the same. Well, not all of them. Deebo and Ayuk are both being drafted like six spots apart. Like, give me the guy that I'm more comfortable with. Give me Deebo there. And I'm not even a Deebo believer or a fan, but give me Deebo. It's just more comfortable because we know he's probably going to be a little more happier in that offense. And give me Parcell late in the draft. Let me steal him late in the draft because guess what? If Ayuk does move on, cool. Parcell's going to step right into that role. And if we all think he's going to be a top 10 or top 13 wide receiver, awesome. Give me Ricky Parcell to be a top 13 wide receiver there. And I'm drafting him at the end of my draft. I don't see the path for Ayuk right now.
Yeah, and Brant, the path for Ayuk may simply be that he does get traded or he doesn't stay there and he re-signs elsewhere next year. Maybe he goes to a Buffalo or someplace where he can go be a number 1 weapon for a good quarterback. But you're right, that's not happening this year. And as you alluded to, Ricky Pearsall has that exact same skill set. So it wouldn't shock any of us, I don't think, if Kyle Shanahan's like, I've heard enough of this crap all over the course of the year. I'm gonna show you how much you don't mean to this offense and start giving some of that volume to somebody else. So I mean, it is definitely one of those scary situations. I mean, if you look back at players, in the past that have had the contract issues. I mean, how many of us have been burned by like guys like Le'Veon Bell, who held out, or it's one of those things that if you miss a few weeks in a fantasy season, Brant, that could be detrimental to whether or not your team makes the playoffs. And especially if you're drafting Ayuk in the first 2 rounds or even first 3 rounds, and he misses a few games for a contract holdout, that's scary business. And you're talking that derails your season.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm coming at you with my passionate take, and I'm ready for this one because I know there's going to be some argument coming from you, Brant. I've got a tag team duo, if you will, for this last one, and that's Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. Now, I got to put this pretense on this, if you will. I'm not saying both of these players are a bust, okay? I'm not doing that. I'm saying that these players will not coexist well together. Jalen Hurts is currently being drafted as the number 2 quarterback overall, right behind Josh Allen. Saquon Barkley is being drafted as the number 6 overall running back, as the 15th total player off the board. Jalen Hurts is the 34th overall player. Here's the thing, Brant. Sleeper has Jalen Hurts to rush for 11 touchdowns and Saquon to rush for 7 on the season. All right. So that's kind of where they're at. Well, listen, Saquon's going into year 7, Brant, and has only rushed for 7 touchdowns or more twice in his career. This is not a thing that he does regularly. Now, I understand that you can make the argument, yeah, he's coming from a putrid Giants offensive line that, he was getting hit in the backfield and having to do everything he could to get out of that backfield. And now he's going to this offensive line with the Eagles. But you've got the best center, one of the best centers in NFL history, and Jason Kelce retiring. You've got all these things that are taking place on this offensive line for Philadelphia to potentially not be as good, as they once were either. So we don't really know for a fact that the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line is that big of an upgrade. Here's the other thing. Hurts is the ultimate Konami code guy, right? He's had 15 total touchdowns in 23, or 15 rushing touchdowns in 2023, 13 in 2022, and 10 in 2021. So, the rushing touchdowns are huge for him. Here's the problem, Brant. If you take the rushing touchdowns away from Jalen Hurts, if you cut his down because all of a sudden Saquon's getting them in the red zone instead of Jalen Hurts, then you're talking about a guy who's, what do we really have in Jalen Hurts? His career best year passing the ball was last year with 23 touchdowns and 15 interceptions, Brant. That's not bringing home the bacon as a fantasy quarterback, especially being taken as the number 2 overall quarterback off the board. So, again, what I'm saying is I think both of these players are very good fantasy assets. I don't like them together because I think for one to succeed, the other has to suffer. Now, yeah, you can make the argument, yeah, he's going to catch passes. That's not really the Philly offense. The running backs don't catch all that many passes. Look at DeAndre Swift when he was there. I mean, it wasn't great. Everybody was hyped up for it. Hurts had a great year. Swift was like RB23 on the season. So, I mean, and again, it brings me to one of your favorite players' names, Kenneth Gainwell. I mean, it was getting some traction there for a while just because there was nothing happening out of that backfield. And if I had to put money down on one of these two guys being successful this year, it's still going to be Jalen Hurts for me because the tush push isn't illegal. He's still going to be getting a lot of those, on the 2-yard line in the red zone, take it and right behind the center. And again, that's going to take away some of these red zone touches from Saquon that he's been used to getting his entire career. I mean, you get inside the 5 with the New York Giants offense, Brant, who's getting the ball in years past? Saquon Barkley. You get inside the 5 with the Philadelphia Eagles offense, you've got Dallas Goedert, you've got A.J. Brown, you've got Devonta Smith, you've got the tush push. Yeah, you've got Saquon Barkley, but if he's not super high up on that pecking order for Nick Sirianni, I could see this being one of those situations where it's like the entire fantasy landscape gets caught with their pants down on this guy. I'm nervous about the two of these guys coexisting, Brant. I know you're a huge Jalen Hurts believer. I know you're a secondary fan of the Eagles almost, it seems like, with your fantasy team in years past. So I'd love for you to tell me what you think of this. Maybe I've doubted you and you're on board with the way I'm feeling about this, but I'd love to hear.
I am on board. I actually think Jalen Hurts is going to be the one that suffers, not Saquon, because I think that tush push, they're going to line up, so everybody's going to be crowding that line. Well, guess what? Jason Kelsey's not there anymore. The main guy that has to get underneath everybody ain't there no more. So what we're going to do, we're going to line up for the tush push, and boom, I'm going to hand the ball off to Saquon, and nobody's going to be in that gap almost all year. I think this is going to be Saquon getting the ball a lot on the one. I think Jalen Hurts is going to suffer this year. I think his fantasy is going to be rough this year. I hope he can still air the ball out, as I am a secondary fan because I do have Devonta Smith. And I hope their defense steps up as I held on to them in our dynasty. I think this is going to be a rough year to own Jalen Hurts because some weeks he may be great for you, but some weeks he may be devastating for you. I think this is Saquon's year. I think this is where Saquon finishes inside the top 5. I absolutely love him this year. I love the fact that he's behind. Yes, Kelsey is gone, but they do still have a nice offensive line there in Philly. I think you're going to – and Saquon, when he gets in the open field, I don't care how old he is. And if he is getting older, I guess I do care how old he is. But right now, he's not at that age where he can't break some tackles. Like, he's going to get in the open field more than he probably ever has in his NFL career, except for maybe that first year. Jalen Hurts does scare me this year. I am avoiding him in redrafts. I am avoiding him in best balls. I do own him in fantasy or dynasty, and I'm not going to ship him because eventually I think it does come back to fruition. Saquon will have to move on. So the rushing upside, and he does still have the rushing upside. I just think those rushing touchdowns do come down. He had, how many did you say he had last year?
15.
Yeah, I 10. 10 is, I think you're talking 10 and 10 for both probably. Saquon will probably add a couple more through the air. So you may be 10 and 12. But yeah, I think I like Jalen Hurts. I like him, but I'm not drafting him as high as everyone else is this year. I'm going to hold on to him in fantasy and enjoy it. This year, I got a share of Saquon Barkley in that same league that I have Devontae Adams. Kind of went after everyone that I've never had a chance to have some hold on in fantasy in that league, and I might be regretting it by the end of it. But I do think that that Hurts is going to be the suffer from all of it.
So you're drafting that nursing home roster over there is what it sounds like, Brant.
Yeah, I got to go for gold for one chance I can, man.
Either gold or Bengay, one of the two.
That's right.
All right, listen. That does it for us on this week's episode. I know next week we're going to move to a new time and try out a new time on Wednesdays. just for scheduling alignment. So we're gonna push it back to 9 p.m. Eastern time. For those of you that do join in and watch with us and hang out. Maybe next week we'll do My Guys, Brant. I don't know how you feel about that. If you want to go ahead and put that out on air, we can plan on My Guys next week.
While we did bust, don't we need to do booms next week?
Yeah, but booms and My Guys are kind of similar, but that's fine. We'll do booms next week.
I need a few more weeks to tally up My Guys here. I'm going to need a couple more drafts, I think.
We'll do some booms next week. So if you want to tune in with us and see who the Fatboyz think are going to explode, into fantasy existence next year, and way outperform their ADP, tune in at 9 p.m. Eastern time next Wednesday, and you will see the two Fatboyz come at it and discuss it here on air.
Absolutely, it'll be good. It'll be good next week. We'll get into the booms. We'll talk about those a lot more next week, and then we'll start digging into My Guys. That we got some training camp coming, so I don't want to spit out My Guys too much until we make sure everybody makes it through training camp safely. Knock on wood. But as always, stay hungry,
stay fat, my friends.